Now, as you no doubt remember, one of the biggest mysteries coming out of The Force Awakens was who are Rey's parents? In fact, during the 2 years leading up to The Last Jedi, that was pretty much the question that everyone was debating. And people had all sorts of theories about just who they could be, why they left her on Jakku of all places, and so on. But maybe the truly funny part about all of that is that at no point did Rey in The Force Awakens ever even mention her parents directly, or have anyone ask her about them specifically. In fact, Rey only ever says that she's waiting for her family, which I think we all assumed meant her parents, but technically, the way she worded it could have meant she was waiting for her grandparents, or maybe an aunt or uncle, or maybe even an older brother or sister, I suppose. Or any combination of the above, really, which also could have included her parents, of course. I mean, I don't know about you, but when referring to just my parents, I refer to them as my parents, not as my family. And sure, maybe Rey was intentionally trying to be coy about who exactly she was waiting for, and used the generic term family, or maybe J.J. Abrams, who wrote the story, was trying to be coy and clever and decided to have Rey use that vague term because he wasn't entirely sure himself who he wanted Rey to be waiting for. Or maybe I should say wasn't sure who Rian Johnson would decide to have Rey be waiting for, because yes, Johnson was indeed the one who ultimately decided who Rey's parents were, and that they were dead. Which of course leads us to all sorts of questions like, who exactly was Rey waiting for on Jakku? It feels like someone specific considering how adamant she was about going back to wait for them during The Force Awakens, even passing up on a job from the famous Han Solo to do so. And since she did just call them family, it's quite possible they actually weren't her parents at all, but maybe a different family member, or someone she considered family at least. There's even a passage in the novelization of The Force Awakens during the Force flashback scene where someone tells Rey to wait here, sweetheart, and that they'll be back for her. Then there's the question, did Rey know all along that her parents were dead? Also, did she ever even know who they were? Or, like with a lot of abandoned kids, I would guess, did she just hope beyond hope that the parents she never knew would come back for her after realizing their mistake? Because there seems to be conflicting information about both those questions in The Last Jedi, which I will get to in a few moments. And this all leads us to the ultimate question of, was Rey waiting for anyone at all on Jakku, or was it just hope that kept her there? Well, the only evidence we have is the Force flashback scene, and it supports the former. Because the vision rather clearly shows Rey being left behind by someone when she was rather young, maybe around the age of 6 or so, and it clearly seemed that Rey knew the person on the ship considering she was screaming for them to come back. And since this was a vision from the Force, I don't think it was meant to deceive her, which means, with almost absolute certainty, we know Rey was waiting for somebody she knew to come back. Somebody that had left her in the care of Unkar Plutt. But the thing is, there's absolutely nothing to say it was her parents on that ship, nothing to say in The Force Awakens that she even knew the first thing about her parents, or whether she knew if they were dead or alive. And then when we move on to The Last Jedi, things really start to get confusing about what Rey knew about her parents, if anything at all, because in the mirror scene she asks to see her parents, and just gets shown an image of herself, which seems to frustrate or disappoint her. And this whole scene really seems to imply she doesn't know anything about them, and that's why she's asking. Because a bit earlier, when Luke is giving Rey her first lesson, Rey is drawn to the dark side because it's offering her something, some knowledge she's after. And that knowledge clearly seems to be who her parents are, since that's what she asks of it when she gets there. But that doesn't make any sense considering a bit later in the movie when Kylo asks if she knows who her parents are, Rey is the one that says they were nobodies, as if she's known all along. This all then raises another fun question. How did Kylo Ren know who her parents were? And there seems to be only two reasonable possibilities here. The first is that Kylo Ren read it from Rey's mind at some point, most likely during the interrogation scene in The Force Awakens, which is the same time Rey was downloading all of his training and making it her own. But anyway, this would then mean that Rey knew her parents were dead all along, and confirmed she was indeed waiting around for someone else that she considered to be her family. Or at the very least, it means she had that information tucked away somewhere in her head and was just in complete denial about it. The second feasible possibility is that at pretty much any time after first hearing about or encountering Rey or the girl, Kylo Ren could have sent a First Order investigator to Nima Outpost on Jakku, who then could have asked around about the girl, the one who helped the droid and the First Order deserter escape. And if this investigator came across Unkar Plutt, which is very likely since he was kind of in charge of the place, Unkar could have probably told the investigator all about Rey's past, especially when you consider he was the one holding Rey's hand in the Force vision when someone was leaving her behind. And quite honestly, this second explanation seems to be the one that makes any real sense. It would then explain why Kylo Ren asks Rey during the throne room scene in The Last Jedi, do you want to know the truth about your parents, or have you always known and you've just hidden it away? Because he learned her backstory from a third party, not from Rey's mind, and he's unsure just how much she actually knows. Anyway, Rey confirms that she knows that they were nobodies, which prompts Kylo Ren to go on to say that they were filthy junk traders that sold her off for drinking money, and that they're buried in a pauper's grave on Jakku. And since Rey doesn't seem to dispute any of that, it seems to imply she believes it, or knows it to be true herself. But again, if she knew that, if she knew they were dead and had sold her off, it really calls into question why she asked to see them during the mirror scene. It calls into question how the dark side was trying to lure her over with information she already knew. It also makes some of the things J.J. Abrams said shortly after the release of The Force Awakens very curious, because as you may recall, at one point Abrams said, and I quote, "Rey's parents are not in Episode 7, so I can't possibly say in this moment who they are, but I will say it is something that Rey thinks about too." Shortly thereafter, though, he backtracked a bit and said, and I again quote, "What I meant was that she doesn't discover them in Episode 7, not that they may not already be in her world." And how I interpret both of those comments is that Abrams is telling us that Rey does not know who her parents are or know anything about them. I mean, at first he basically said who they are is something that she thinks about, and then he corrected himself by saying that she doesn't discover them in Episode 7, which implies she doesn't know who they are if she can discover their identity. Then you have Rian Johnson's comments about why he decided to make Rey's parents nobody special, and again, I'm quoting here. "That would be the easiest thing for her to hear, and easiest thing for us to hear. Wish fulfillment. It's like, oh great, that's who I am, that's that. The hardest thing she could hear is, no, you're not going to get that answer, that definition. In fact, the fact that you don't have that is going to be used against you by Kylo to try and make you lean on him. You're going to have to find the strength to define yourself and stand on your own 2 feet." And there are a couple interesting things in what Johnson said, and I'm going to pretty much leave alone the fact that Rey hearing she was someone important, that she did have a role to play, and couldn't or shouldn't just walk away from it all, may have been equally difficult for her to hear, considering she's a person who had spent her whole life fending only for herself. But sure, Ryan, I guess hearing she was nobody and was free to go back to caring about only herself, which is what she'd always done and was comfortable with, was somehow harder for her to hear, because Rey was basically told she had no inherited responsibility to care about what's happening, no real personal stakes in this fight, which is a big part of the problem with the character. She has no clear motivation. But anyway, Johnson is basically saying in his statement here that Rey learned who her parents were in this movie, and that it had a drastic impact on her, even though again, she was the one who actually said they're nobodies, which implies she already knew, which contradicts what Johnson is saying here. Johnson then went on to essentially say Kylo was smart enough to try and use that information against her, which means he would have every motivation to lie to her, or to somehow plant false information in her mind. And considering the two have had their minds bonded by Snoke somehow, that Rey has already downloaded information from his mind before and used it without even understanding how she was doing it, and that Kylo seems to specialize in mental manipulation, it's not much of a stretch to believe that Kylo could put that information there to use against her, and that none of it is true. And as I see it, the story we've now been given by 2 different writers with clearly different visions makes more sense if Rey never knew anything about her real parents, but was always interested to know more, as any kid would be. At one point in her past then, when she was very young, someone that was caring for her, perhaps even a guardian assigned by her real parents, had to go somewhere on some type of dangerous mission and left her behind. And they temporarily left her in the care of Unkar Plutt until they got back, but that guardian never did return for whatever reason, so Rey spends her whole life waiting for this person she thought of as family, this person that promised they would return, or who knows, maybe when this person left they said that soon she was going to be reunited with her family. Anyway, the point is, she's been waiting for this person her whole life. But of course this guardian never comes back, and eventually Unkar stops looking out for her, and Rey learns to fend for herself. However, she never gives up hope that the person who left her is going to come back someday with her family. Then in The Last Jedi, the dark side tries to lure her over by offering her that which she seeks, information about the family she's never known. That's why she asks the mirror to see them, because she truly doesn't know who they are but desperately wants to. The mirror doesn't show her, however, which sends her right to Kylo Ren, which is what the dark side would want. And do keep in mind that's the very first thing Rey does. She runs to Kylo, or mind melds with him, I guess, and tells him all about her experience in the cave, which basically lets Kylo Ren know how desperate she is to learn about her family and her parents, and gives him a plan to turn her to the dark side, to convince her or to plant a false, forgotten memory in her head that they were nobodies, and that they sold her and abandoned her, that to them she didn't matter, but that he won't abandon her, and that to him she is important. And no, I'm not implying that Rian Johnson intended for Kylo to be lying in that scene, only that it'd be easy for J.J. Abrams to play it off that way, because Johnson didn't seem to really line up all the pieces in order to have that scene make any sense. Earlier in his own movie, he's having Rey ask to see her parents as if she knows nothing about them, and later she's the one who's saying they were nobody, as if she's known all along. That just doesn't make any real sense. There's also the fact that in the previous movie, we see Rey being left behind by somebody, and if those are her parents, and if Kylo is telling the truth, that means they sold Rey for drinking money, left the planet to drink, of course, and then at some point came back to Jakku and died and were buried in a pauper's grave. And something tells me that if you're selling your daughter, it's more than for drinking money, it's to get off the planet, which begs the question, why would you ever come back? Wouldn't it make more sense if Kylo Ren made up the whole thing and planted the story somehow, having no idea that Rey recently had a vision of someone she cared about, someone that may have also cared about her, leaving and maybe promising to come back for her? Anyway, I hope with episode 9, J.J. Abrams can still manage to give us some interesting answers to at least some of the questions he began in The Force Awakens. And I'm not saying Rey has to be someone important. I'm fine if that's not the case. I just would actually like to know what her deal is, because we know almost nothing about her at all. It's hard to care about and get invested in a main character that has no depth or backstory, no clear direction or motivation. I honestly can't tell you what she wants or why she's fighting, why she's so quickly bonded with Kylo Ren and was willing to foolishly risk her life to save him when self-preservation has been her entire life as far as we know. What is it that drives her to try and do the right thing when this character has spent almost her entire life fending for herself on one of the harshest planets in the galaxy? And if Kylo is to be believed, she had parents that didn't care about her and sold her off. So how does someone like that, someone who grows up in the worst possible environment, abandoned by terrible parents, forced to scrape and claw every day just to survive, care so much about just doing the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing? How does she ever trust anybody, much less seemingly everybody she encounters, including a guy she watched murder his own father, unless there was someone else in her life at one point that instilled some actual goodness in her, someone that Kylo doesn't want her to remember, someone that was on that ship that left her? And if this story is going to be salvaged, if we're ever going to truly care about Rey, we need to find out who she really is. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me if you can make sense out of Rey's story thus far, and if you think Kylo was lying or not. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.